Having a therapist is no longer a secret. But is it only the norm in financially privileged circles?
With accessibility and affordability at the forefront, the Frontline therapist is determined to make therapy available to all.
In this episode, we ask founder Ngozi why culturally sensitive therapy is so important and what therapy professionals can do to make it more accessible for more people.
Ngozi, we are so happy to have you here, and we are thrilled to talk to you all about what you do at the Frontline therapist, because therapy is in greater and greater demand at the moment, but it really feels like the NHS are stretched to their limits. But a lot of people don't have access to therapy and mental health services. But you're really passionate about making these services accessible. And I'd love to just ask you why you think that's so important.
That's a good question, Victoria. And I think the reality is that therapy, both in the UK and in America, has always been a very middle class kind of provision. And it shouldn't be, but it has been. Mm-hmm. It's expensive to become a psychotherapist, and it's expensive to access therapy. So you kind of have it where it ends up being just a few people that have access to it. And given the fact that unfortunately life is just getting harder, things ain't easier, more people are suffering, more people are struggling, more people are realizing that drugs, medication, alcohol, all these other type of self-medicating kind of methods are not really helping. So if we want more people to be well, if we want more people to be able to function in society, if we want more people to contribute into society and just feel good within themselves, then therapy needs to be accessible to some sort of degree. There's always going to be different levels. Even my service, there's still going to be people that can't afford it, but you want to create you want to open it up so that more people have a chance and opportunity, especially from communities like ourselves, where we're already kind of distrustful anyways of mental health services because of historical failings. So I think it's important because reality is that the economy likes to, and the companies like to complain of the amount of people not attending work because of their mentors, right? Gen Z especially is very big into the mental health day, but essentially it's impacting society. We can see it day in, day out. We could just read Twitter. You've only got to go on Twitter. And probably the comments on some of your YouTube thinking, are you okay? What's going on? People need help. And at least if it's accessible or open to as many people as possible, then really, if you're not accessing it, then it's your decision. It's you that's not accessing it rather than I can't access it because it's not available.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there that we're seeing this increase in, I guess, conversation around mental health. Do you think that there's actually been a rise in the amount of people that are struggling with mental health? Or is it just that people are being more vocal about it? Has this always been a huge issue, but people maybe didn't talk about it before?
I think both.
Okay.
I think that there's, I don't know if it's a cause and effect. I think it's both a correlation. I think that maybe 20, 30 years ago, our parents had different conditions, would never have accessed therapy, would never considered therapy, so they just had to get on with it. Whereas now, even though there's still inaccessibility, there is more of a no, I'm going to get something that's mine, right? I'm going to do it. I need to look after myself. There's more self-care and all of this stuff. So I think that, and then the more conversation about it, the more people are realizing that actually it's okay to talk about it. We're no longer in our parents' generation where it's be tough and just keep going. It's soft life, right? I want to have an easy life. But I think it's a correlation. At the same time, more conversations are happening is bringing more awareness. So then more people are now aware they've got things, the trauma that they've been carrying from their families. And then I think, the pandemic, I just think social media, not just because of the effects of social media, it's just the fact that you can see that everyone is going through things. Like back in the day, I didn't know what was going on in Ireland, or I only knew what was going on in my doorstep. Now I can know what Christian Rock and Blueface are doing in America, because they're showing us every single day. Exactly. So I think that all of those stuff and just life, what's happened in Syria and Turkey, there's people here that have lost loved ones. That's going to naturally trigger people and make people more in need of services.
Given that context, I'd love to ask you, do you think in society, therapy is a luxury, or do you think it's a necessity? I know it's a tough one, but
I think therapy is a necessity. However, we have to acknowledge the privilege that we have in the Western world. So for people in Africa and Asia, and still even some parts of Eastern Europe, it's a luxury. They don't have the opportunity there for many different reasons, for different infrastructure reasons, etc. So I think when we hear luxury, we think of Louis Vuitton, and we think of like something that's commodity, that's not important. When we say luxury, what we mean is that the realization that it's not available to everyone all over the world. So we can sit here and talk about the inaccessibility in the UK, but we know that in certain parts of the world, therapy what?
Yeah, it's so true, actually. And I think that's a part, I guess, of the conversation that we often miss. But as you say, we're looking at the context in the UK of whether therapy is accessible or not. And I've seen such a whole range of different approaches that platforms are offering to try and make therapy more accessible. What does it mean to you? What does accessible therapy mean from your perspective as a therapist who's building a business as well?
That's a good question. What does accessible mean to me? I think accessible means that it's a bit like what does opportunities mean to you? It means if I apply for a job, for example, I'm not saying I should get it, but I should have the opportunity to apply, right? I think that's what I mean. When I say accessibility, I should have the opportunity. I should be able to have the means to go online and look for therapy. Now, it might mean that, that's a bit expensive. That one's a bit more affordable. That one's a bit more far away. Maybe there's some choices in the matter. You can't access like Carly Street. I ain't paying no £100 per session. It's accessible, but it's a bit expensive. So I think it's that kind of the opportunity that you can go online, or you can go to your local community centre and access it. It's not being told no blacks, no Irish, no dogs like back in the day. I think that's what accessibility means to me. But obviously I think there are levels to it. Some people may not have good internet, for example. Maybe, they can't go on that. I think there'll be very few people that do have that. But that's an example of that. You don't even have access to internet, let alone the choice to look for therapies. So we're not going to that granular level, but it's more about people don't even know what's out there. You don't know where to find it. And to be fair, it is a postcode lottery. Some areas have more provision than other areas. So that's also included in the conversation of accessibility.
I imagine cultural factors as well play such a huge role, because in some cultures it's going to be more acceptable and normalized, and others it's, that I certainly know in my household, it's like therapy is not a... And
thank you for saying that, because people assume, I get this question all the time, because of course we know that Black and Asian there's a lot of stigma and lots of things attached. But I say it all the time, because I, as a mental health social worker, I've worked with a lot of white families, and you say therapy and it's still the same. It's the same similar reaction. It really is though there's a racial element, it's very class level. And even certain classes, the middle class, they don't talk about it. It's people that came from a particular, like in the UK, in London specifically, people that live in Highgate and that area. That's where a lot of the psychotherapy in the UK kind of started from, that area. So it's not even all types of middle class people that are into therapy either. So when you look at the whole of the UK, still a large part of the UK, whatever race is therapy, what? Therapy is... We're not seeing a shrink. Let alone if there are cultural barriers as well. And religious barriers as well to add to that.
Age, I think actually just for everyone, our generation, our parents' generation, it's such a different...
It's just about go GP. They just about go to the GP, right?
Literally. It's just... So it is crazy. Really difficult. And I feel that our generation have to be these real... we've got so much on our shoulders in terms of breaking...
Generational trauma. Breaking
these norms.
It's true though, because I think even, like you say, the generation above us, I am a textbook millennial, and my mum...
What do you mean by that? When you say textbook millennials, and you just off the cuff of millennials?
No, I mean more that I tick every cliche that people associate with a millennial. I'm banging the younger part of millennial.
Well, what younger part? Because I'm 90s, beginning of 90s.
Early 90s.
Okay,
yeah. But I found out that Rishi Sunak is also a millennial, apparently, which...
When was he born?
I don't know. He's about 40 though.
Okay, so oh my God, he's a millennial!
Which is crazy.
There needs to be a subgroup.
Exactly.
The middle range millennials, there's the older millennials, which is a 1980 that. 40, 41. The younger millennials, which was like 95, 96, they tried to claim that they're millennials.
Like the millennial.
I think it was the millennial, exactly.
Exactly.
Yes.
But like, it's
real
true.
deal.
Like, I look at my my mum, and my mum she's not actually quite a baby boomer. She's a little bit younger than that.
Okay.
She's in her mid 50s, and even when I have conversations with her, I would say that she is remarkably she is different to the boomers. You can tell that she's younger. She's a lot more, I guess, open-minded in a lot of respects. But there are still topics like money and things where she I think is a bit uncomfortable. And I really have to push her to tell me figures and to be open. We were talking the other day about her mortgage, and I was like, how many years is it left on it? And she was like, oh yeah, a few. And I was like, no, come on, what are we talking? Your house, how much is it actually worth? And it's so funny just seeing, because I feel like we're really starting as a generation to shift away from that. And like you say, with therapy, it feels like our generation are talking about it. I wouldn't think twice about saying to my friends now, like, oh yeah, I go to therapy. And it does seem to be shifting the conversation and making it more normalized, which I guess in a way is maybe part of the accessibility conversation. Because if you don't know it's there and it's out there and people are using it, how do you use it?
Exactly. And I think you said something that triggered me, that the whole argument with like luxury brands, right? Is like there was a time that luxury brands were so inaccessible. Now everybody's wearing Balenciagas and things like that. And then people that are really elite are like really annoyed because like, why is everybody coming and shopping for these things, right? But there is something about that. The more people that seem to have access to Balenciagas and all of these brands is luxury, but it's not as luxury as it once was. And I think in that way, that's good for therapy.
Yeah.
Like it's no longer, even though it still to a degree is, but it's no longer just a predominantly white middle class profession, elite. Like again, because not everyone even fit into that bubble. Actually, yeah, no, I've got a therapist. It's actually cool to have a therapist. I love saying I've got a therapist. I'm like, yeah, me and my therapist spoke the other day, and I've known her longer than I've known my husband. So it's like,
Yeah.
Like, I ain't leaving you unless you are old. So boy, there will come a time when you're not here. But until then.
Yeah, I say it to my therapist all the time. I'm like, never, ever, ever retire. Like, you
I'm saying, yeah, so you can't retire. You can retire everybody else, but not me.
Yeah. But I'd love to ask, because I'm with you on your kind of mission. Like, I so believe in the importance of making therapy more accessible.
She's a therapy evangelist. That's when you know when
Yeah. Like
therapy, like, meet someone. You want to go to therapy? You should go to therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm having difficulty with my boyfriend. Do you want therapy?
Yeah.
No, but I would love to know, what are the main, what needs to happen? Like, how do we go about making it more accessible? And what can people who are counselors, therapists do to make this, who aren't, who wouldn't even know where to start, but how would they go about starting to make it more accessible?
Do you know what I think? I think media is a big thing to do with it,
I think,
I think, I don't know if anyone watches Marriage at First Sight. Did you watch the
Yes.
UK version, right?
Yes.
With Paul Brunson and the others and stuff like
Is that
that.
the thing when they're in those separate pod rooms?
No, that's
That's Love is Blind.
yeah. Married
okay,
at First Sight is wilder.
Literally, you just marry at first sight. Like,
You meet them at the altar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think all three of so they have, I don't call them judges, let's call them therapists. That's therapists, they're all coaches. And they're all three therapists. So that, and again, is potentially an example of breaking down kind of barriers of what therapy looks like. And in the UK, two are black as well. One black man, one black female. So again, it shows that there are black therapists as well. So I think that helps, because let's be honest, for me, before I became a therapist, I thought therapy was like Frasier. Do you remember Frasier?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I genuinely thought that you lie down. And that's the psychoanalysis there is. But when I first went to a therapist and she told me to take off my shoes, it just made me feel really uncomfortable, because it made me think, oh my God, I'm going to sit there in a chair, which I did. And she was just quiet, which she was. And then when I met my therapist now, she was like this, hey. And I was like, I love it.
Yeah.
I was like, should I take off my shoes? She was like, no. I was like, this is what I'm talking about. It was like normal. I'm chatting to somebody normal rather than like, glasses, writing like that. I didn't want that.
Well, I really wanted to ask this question, like, how important do you think it is to find a therapist? If you want therapy to be effective, how important do you think it is to feel that kind of, we're on the same page?
I think you need to have a connection.
What's important? What makes a good match? That's a much better question. Like, what makes a good match?
In the initial sense, rapport.
Okay.
Reality is you're not going to trust them, you don't know them, but you might have a sense that you might trust them. Like when you meet somebody, you think, I think I can trust you, but we've got to have a relationship and see. I think it's this initial rapport. Is that, for example, what I didn't say is that the first therapist that I went to, who I really wanted, was a Black therapist. She was a social worker. She was everything that I thought I wanted to be.
Yeah. And
I was so devastated, I didn't connect with her. And then my current therapist, who I've had for 8 years, is white. And I said to her, she was like, are you looking at anyone else? I was like, yeah, I've got a Black therapist who I really want, and then there's you. And I'm confused. I don't know what to do because I really wanted a Black therapist who I thought would understand me.
Yeah.
But I didn't click with her. I've clicked with a white middle-class therapist.
Yeah.
Like, say what? Like, what, really?
That's so interesting.
But I decided I went with the comfortability.
Okay.
I went with, 'cause I had to feel comfortable. And I did not feel comfortable. And it doesn't mean that therapist was bad, because she's an amazing therapist. I know a lot of people that have her as a supervisor and therapist. I just did not click with her. And it was important for me, as I'm going to be spending £50 per session every single week, £2,000 a year. Yeah, I've made the calculations.
Yeah.
So it was important for me. So I think anyone listening and watching, you can't always explain it. It's an unexplainable feeling. It's just like if you meet a friend and you just click. You have to have that click. Now, once you get past that click, you have to build trust, and you have to take a risk, because your therapist will disappoint you. He or she will make mistakes, and that is part of the real work. When a person makes mistakes, and the difference between that and maybe family is that when they disappointed you, they didn't repair it well. A good therapist will repair that rupture that occurs, and then that teaches you that actually when things go wrong, you got to stick with it and keep, so rather than like running away, going back into your attachments, whatever it is. So that's what I would say is important, is once you've got the initial rapport, you've got to build trust, but you do have to take risks.
Can you give us an example? Like, I'd love to,
What does it mean when a therapist disappoints you?
Teach us as a
Okay, so even for example, this is a perfect example. Let's say everyone's got different attachment styles, different processes. So let's say, for example, you constantly feel rejected by people, right? And then your therapist maybe for whatever reason forgets your session.
Okay.
And you're waiting and you're thinking, oh my God, what's happened? And then you call or message, she goes, I'm so sorry, I forgot. That can send you into a spiral of, I'm not wanted, nobody loves me, I feel abandoned, right? And that can come out maybe in anger, in silent treatment, in whatever. And that's a rupture, because in your mind, you're meant to be there at this time consistently, and you have failed me. Somebody else like me, I wouldn't be bothered with that. Oh, yeah, it happens. That's not an issue I deal with.
Yeah.
But somebody else that deals with that, that's a rupture that's occurred in the relationship. And what's now got to happen is that it needs to be repaired. So it's like if there's like a little rope and the little line goes into it, you don't want it to cut entirely, because it's very difficult to put it back together. But a little tear, then you mend it back together. So the therapist does work in actually saying, okay, how does that make you feel that disappointed you? Where does that send you to? Where does that come from? Where does that remind you of? And then going to that point and then building that back up. And what's meant to happen is that essentially the person realizes that people do disappoint you, but that's not what we should focus on. It's on, okay, how can we make it work? The issue is that you've been disappointed and nobody cared. Where I cared that I disappointed you.
Yeah.
I still disappointed you, and I'm probably going to do it again, but I cared that I disappointed you and I want to make it work. That's the difference. And that's what the person has to then learn, although it's really painful, because it takes them back to past times with family or friends or whoever it was that caused that initial trauma for them.
And this just all sort of highlights the importance, like you said, of building that relationship over time. It's a relationship of trust. You're getting to know the therapist, but they're really getting to know you and what you need. Yeah. And one question I'm really interested to ask you is, like, it's great, like you say, it's like 50 quid a session. It can be a little bit less, it can be a little bit more depending on where you go. Well, actually, it could be sky high depending on where, it can be a lot more depending on where you go. Yeah, but it's great that there's so many of these kind of platforms that are much lower cost. It might be like a monthly subscription kind of thing where you can kind of book I don't actually know because I haven't been on them, but I think like you could book a half-hour slot or something like that, but you're probably going to get a different person each time. Or either way, just being online, I imagine you're not going to build up that same sort of, it's just not going to be as easy to build that trusting relationship. Do you think that having these lower cost platforms are better than nothing? Or do you think, like, really, if someone needs therapy, it's probably worth them spending a little bit more money on to like get the full in-person experience with the same therapist?
Well, I would challenge on the fact that I don't think online is not as good
Yeah,
as
I was going to say.
face-to-face.
Yeah, you don't think online is good?
No, I was going to say the same thing just because I know a lot of people who prefer it.
Yeah, actually, I think when I started doing it, but I don't mean like Zoom versus in person. I just mean more like one consistent therapist. It's like a one-to-one thing versus like a platform where you might be entitled to like 20 credits a month.
Yeah.
But,
okay.
Yeah.
It's different. I think if we're talking about entrepreneurial wise, then I think that's a smart way to when I say exploit, I don't mean it in the right way.
Well, I'm talking like effective wise, like what's going to be effective? Is it worth it?
I would say that there's a part that I would say that there is a sense of better than nothing.
Yeah.
The reality is some people can't afford £200 a month because on average, £50 a week, £200 a month, some people can't afford that.
It's a lot of money.
Or let's say this, some people can, but it's not a priority enough as well. That is a fair point to put, right? Because to me, I always say we pay for holidays on our credit card, we pay for clothes on our credit card. I'm not trying to encourage anyone to use their credit card just generally, but why can't you pay for therapy for 3 months on your credit card? That's maybe £600 that you can then pay back over a period of time, right? But we do that for many other things, but we don't really do that for health in that way, which I find quite interesting. But then I think that it is better than nothing because some people don't have access. Because the reality is, before the pandemic, a lot of people of ethnic background did not have access to someone who looked like them because they lived in York. So then online enabled them to speak to someone in London who's from the same cultural background. But hopefully they're having it consistently. Having it ad hoc is, I think, better than nothing because some people need ad hoc until they feel comfortable to have it consistently. Because it's scary. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to meet somebody and tell you about my business that nobody else knows.
Yeah.
But maybe having just one moment where I share and blurt out, and then you have that kind of, what happens? That backlash. People think, oh my God, I just told that person my deep, darkest things. But then maybe 3 months later, they go, you know what? I want to try this again. They had a really good one-time experience, and that made them feel they can do this again.
Yeah.
So I think there's different levels. I think some people would say, on the other hand, I know I'm not going to mention names of certain companies, that the therapists are not being adequately paid enough. So then that questions about maybe the level of quality of care that the person will be getting, all of that. So that's why I said that it's better than nothing, but there are other things to consider in terms of the wider practice that maybe the therapists themselves are not getting paid enough.
Yeah, that's
if it's cheap, if you're paying £40 for a qualified therapist, and you're going to a platform, an intermediary, how much is that therapist really getting?
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. And I guess, you have to interrogate it because on the surface, it might be like, oh, great, I can get really cheap access to therapy, but are you getting good enough quality support for what you need? But that brings me on to another question, which is just, do you think that actually everyone, regardless of their circumstances, background, situation, can benefit from therapy?
I think I actually said can, potentially.
Yeah.
Will they? I think that there are, there's a significant amount of people that go therapy and don't think it's helpful. They really try and just don't think it's helpful for many reasons. Maybe they don't think it's helpful in one part of their life. 10 years later, they think it's helpful. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, without saying the N word, which is narcissist, everyone loves to use that.
Gaslight.
Like everyone says that. That group of people that go therapy, they don't think they need therapy. So they tend to also go to therapists who are very prominent and prestigious because of what they think. So I've had a few come into my service and they sit there and they test you. They tell you, I'm testing you. I want to see if you're good enough. And a few of them haven't, it's very difficult. So that's an extreme, but people are on a spectrum of different things. And I'll be very honest with you, I've probably met over 1,000 to 2,000 people in we're not working with them one-on-one, but maybe assessing them.
Yeah.
And there's a good 10% of people that I know therapy ain't gonna do nothing for you for a while, but you're just not in the mode, you don't care. You're too defended.
Yeah.
You're too defended. And
you have to be ready to be
You have to be ready and you have to be a level of willingness. And some people come with a lot of ego.
Yeah.
They come with a lot of pride. They come with a lot of arrogance. And I think that's not a good recipe for a good therapeutic relationship.
It could take a long time to break all that down. I think it was a year before I started after a year I turned around, I was like, oh, like I'm actually being honest now. Like I'm finally starting to be honest, like with myself. It's such a crazy journey.
It is. It took me about 2 years.
Yeah.
To open up, but I wasn't disrespectful or arrogant.
No, really,
and you wasn't either.
No,
that's different. Where I'm going to be patient with you, and build that trust. But there are some clients that you'll be sitting there thinking, "Don't come to me, mate. Don't come to me."
And I guess one final question I have as well is, I think there's so much more conversation now than ever before about parenting. And, I'm at a point where I'm starting to have friends who are having children and they're very aware of all of these different influences and styles of parenting because they want to raise this secure, well-rounded child. Is it actually possible to raise a child in a way that is, I guess, fault-free? Because it feels like that's almost what the world is trying to do. It's trying to go from one extreme where we've got a generation who all need therapy. It's like everyone wants to now repair that and raise a generation where everyone is perfect.
Do you know what I would say? I would say it's like a bit like a filtering system. We are trying to filter as much gunk out, and then hopefully the children will filter the rest to get to a point where it is clear water. But I think it's going to take many generations.
Yeah.
So I think parents need to not put your child's going to go therapy, probably most likely, even if you're trying the best parent ever. It is like, look, therapist children are in therapy because their parents were therapists. Like, so the reality is, I think we've also to say that going to therapy doesn't mean that there's lots of bad things. It could just be like, I still just want to unclog whatever is in my head. So I think, you're going to do your best and, you're going to make mistakes. So, and again, that's what parents need to understand, and why I think some of our parents, we have issues with them, is that they don't want to open up to their mistakes, where our generation is more willing to be open to our mistakes, but maybe go to one extreme. So I don't want to make any mistakes at all. It's like, no, actually children learn from when you make mistakes. It's how you deal with the mistakes that's usually the biggest impact. So your mother leaving you for a day and you thinking you've been abandoned is one thing, but coming back and trying to explain to you, darling, I left, might help you, rather than going, why are you crying? Like, I just went to go get things like, well, I didn't know that, I'm a child. All I saw was you weren't there. So I would just say to parents, look, take it easy, because over sanitizing is going to cause issue.
Yeah.
Reality is you're going to do something to your child, because children are children. They're going to react a certain way. They're not always going to understand what you do. You might love them and they might know that, but the way their little brain understands certain things is just going to be different. They'll go therapy and then they will do even better for their kids. And that's the aim, that every generation does better than the former generation. But I don't think that you can cleanse the full water and the gunk out.
The other question that I wanted to ask before we let you go is, for people who have watched this and are kind of on that point that you'd mentioned before, where they might be thinking about doing therapy, but they haven't quite dipped their toe in the water. I'd love if you could just tell us about some of the material benefits your clients, like you've seen yourself also, and your clients from having therapy and going through the process.
That's a good question. I think that everyone's different. Some people find immediate, but like literally the first week, oh my God, I'm healed. No, not really. But, some people is a more immediate, some people is more gradual. I think you get self-awareness. Self-awareness is key, meaning that you begin to understand yourself in relation to others. You don't take everything personal. You realize that you're not the center of everybody. That person's upset with me. No. That person's upset because they're going through something, right? So self-awareness is key. That's probably one of the number one thing that therapy does for self-awareness. It helps you mend relationships. First with yourself. We have to mend ourselves, and then it helps you mend relationships with other people. I think that's important. Or it might make you decide not to mend, but the point is that you're doing it from an informed place.
Yeah.
And I think the third point is it makes you make informed decisions rather than unconscious decisions driven from past traumas and hurts. So if you're going to go back to that guy who cheated on you, at least you're doing it informed. You're like, okay, I know that, you're emotionally unavailable, but I'm going to you. At least you're making informed decisions rather than, how did I get back here again? Why does this keep happening to me? And also, it can push you forward and propel you. So it helps to deal with, like, if you feel unstuck, if you feel demotivated, if you feel like, purposeless. I think that's really important because it's not just about dealing with the past, it's helping you in the present and in your future. And I think that's really important. I can say many more, but I'll put those three because those are immediate things you can begin to see. There's bigger things like generational trauma, on dealing with like really deep wounds. But for a lot of people, you will see self-awareness, you will see being informed and mending relationships first with yourself.
Yeah. Amazing. One last question. I'm so sorry. I just want to get it in. I can't help myself. It's like, I would love to see the cost of therapy come down because I know loads of people who would like to access therapy, but they're like, I just can't afford it. And even for me, when I started it, it was a real stretch. And I know cost is just such a barrier for so many people. Is there anything, you as a therapist, is there anything that could be done on your side that could bring down is there anything that the industry could do to bring down the cost to the customer on the receiving end?
If the cost of living crisis wasn't...
Yeah, well, the whole cost of living crisis.
Do you know what? I think that's going to be a question that's not going to be easily solved because the reality of it is that if, let's say, therapists were getting £30 per hour, that might sound really good. And that is a good amount per hour, but it is very emotionally draining. And
that's the thing, yeah.
The amount of clients you can see in a day is limited. So maybe you only see 5 clients. I'm not really good at maths. What's 3 times 5? 150? What's 150? Let's say you work 5 days a week. What's 150 times 5?
750.
750. What's 750 times 4?
£3,000.
Okay, that is good. Fair enough. That is good. But there's still taxes, there's still things.
Yeah.
In the cost of living crisis,
half of that is going on rent.
Yeah.
So when you really think about it, therapists would be struggling just as much as the person coming to them. And after a while, not saying they resent you as the client, but they resent the practice.
Yeah.
Because they're like, why am I doing this job that I'm pouring in, I'm doing a lot, but I'm not really being financially remunerated. And especially it's so expensive to do. So I think it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
So I don't think I can answer that question.
Do you know what as well? I think, I think the value of a therapist is going to just only increase and increase over the coming years. And so maybe the question is not how can we reduce the cost of therapy? It's like, how can we improve people's affordability?
Yeah. Maybe actually the answer is that, there needs to be more funding for people to be able to access it, whether that's through schools, through education, through workplaces, private healthcare, helping people to go to therapy. And I know some employers are doing it, but it really just needs to hopefully grow. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But thank you so much for coming on. This has been brilliant. And I have just got so many thoughts going through my head that I'm going to take away and unpack. And I know as well, so many people that will listen to this and have that light bulb moment. I think of like, okay, I actually probably need to speak to a therapist or at least explore going to therapy because of some of those different issues that we've just touched on. But for anyone that wants to find out more about you, about the Frontline Therapist, where's the best place to go?
Follow me on Instagram, Ngozi Cadmus, NGOZICADMUS. And follow me and find out all the things I'm doing. I've got a TED Talk coming out in a couple of weeks. Thank you. So I'll be talking about how to disrupt the absence of Black women leaders at the top of corporate Britain.
Wow.
So I do a lot of work within minority mental health and minority leadership. So follow me on Instagram and all social media platforms.
Amazing. By the time this